right, time for us to get into a conversation. We're looking at President William Ruto's performance 1 year on. Right here in studio, I'm joined by the Honorable Gitonga Mukunji, the Member of Parliament for Manyata in Embu County, as well as Annette Harima, the Programs Manager from the Kenya Human Rights Commission, Mheshimiwa Abdul Haru from Mandera South, and also from Mombasa, the Honorable Robert Basil, the Member of Parliament for Yatta. All of you are very much welcome. And our conversation tonight, obviously, will start from the point of economy, and probably to start with you, Mheshimiwa Gitonga Mukunji. When you look at the pledges of the president pre-election versus how he has performed, how would you rate the president?
Thank you so much, Mr. JJ, for this evening, and a very nice setting at KBC. First, I would like to say hi to my viewers, especially my bosses in Manyata constituency. And I would like to say that it has been a year that is of good experience. Myself and the president, we got into the new positions, me being the Member of Parliament and the president being the president of this country. And let me say that coming to your question is that we need to actually look at the achievements in a realistic manner, more than what has been happening around when you listen to people criticizing the president, especially in terms of where we have come from as a country. And as I said previously, is that the first order of business for this presidency was to manage a crisis that was hidden and not announced in public before. And this is a crisis of exorbitant borrowing that had no breaks, issue of borrowing to really consume other than to conjure economic growth, and issues to do with believing now as a country we have to be disciplined in terms of our resources and what we can get. And 1 year down, I would say that the president has done fantastically well. And this one, I'm looking at it as a way of, first of all, managing the country in terms of what the extent of what we can do in terms of what we can receive. And also the issue of really coming to terms with our economy. And I will tell you, JJ, that we used to borrow money to pay our salaries. There was money borrowed previously to even pay bonuses for tea and coffee, which is an unfortunate matter. But now we have seen a case where in some few months, even salaries were delayed because there was no money to really pay. And that was something that we need to recognize.
We shall get to the details of the management of that, but very quickly, so that I go to the other.
Yes.
So you're saying the president was dealing with a crisis. Do you think he has dealt with it?
He has actually done the first preliminary arrangement to ensure now this country is able to build up.
All right.
And I'll tell you that by looking at even the budget, the first budget that we read 2 months ago of the 3.6 trillion, that budget, if you look at it, we are collecting an estimate, and I believe it will even be surpassed this year. We are estimating to collect close to 2.5 trillion in terms of what we are collecting locally.
And we'll talk about that
in a bit.
And
we are going to also reduce on the borrowing, as we have done previously, with around 300 billion that was supposed to be borrowed, and we did not borrow.
Let me bring in Annette, because Mheshimiwa Mukunji says it was a crisis. For the president, it was first the agenda of managing a problem before now getting to your real agenda of economic growth. How do you think the president has fared from IEC?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give a 4.
A 4?
Yes.
Okay.
So this government was elected on a promise of economic recovery, the bottom-up agenda.
Yeah.
And during the campaign period, it was clear we were not in a good place economically. The issue of public debt was known during the campaign to both parties. Whoever would win knew when you talk about public debt, that was a challenge. When you talk about public finance management, that was a challenge. So at least we are certain and comfortable that the leadership of today came into being knowing the problems that we face economically as a nation. However, there was a promise that this was going to change. And in changing, 1 year into government, it's basically laying foundations that should demonstrate that there is a change, or there's that economic recovery that was anticipated and also promised to Kenyans.
Do you think they're doing that?
The question is then, is that happening? To me, it's not happening as we ought to be seeing. For example, a good promise was the Hustler Fund, and immediately in 3 months' time, there was the Hustler Fund, and there was the distribution of resources to people in the low-income cadre. But the question is then, did the Hustler Fund meet its objective? Do we have structures to facilitate and also sustain the Hustler Fund? When you talk about accountability of the Hustler Fund, so is it something that we will be seeing eventually, and also the Kenyans to themselves? Is this something that they can comfortably sit and say the president really delivered as...
Hold that thought. Well, it's a big question, holding the president accountable, and one of course the measures around the Hustler Fund. Mheshimiwa Haro, before we head over to Mombasa, we are on the economic front, and according to Annette, the president has not shown that he's laying down the bricks towards economic recovery.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, the president has done a wonderful job. If Kenya was an organization, you'll tend to ask yourself, when we started off, what was the baseline? And the baseline, as described briefly by my colleague, Honorable from Manyata, the president came into power with an organization or a country which had, run away, cost of living, which was almost unmanageable. Came into power with a country heavily in debt, came into power with ravaging drought, and somewhere mid his first 12 months, we had to confront these many mandamanos, which also disrupted our economy. So the president actually has done a wonderful job so far. He's fulfilled some of the promises even in the first 100 days, like for example appointing the judges, giving judiciary the autonomy on their funds, the police likewise, and the president has laid foundation for the mortar and bricks for building our economy from now going forward. A number of legislations have passed through Parliament, basically addressing almost every sector of our economy and every sector of our society. Talk of health, talk of education, talk of agriculture, food production, and what have you. Quite a number of things have been laid in place, and we will actually realize the fruits of that, foundation in the next 1 or 2 years to come.
We'll talk about the foundation. Let me head over to Mombasa in a bit. Talk to the Honorable Basil. Of course, the promise of the president was to reduce the cost of living. I think in the first 100 days being elected into office, coupled with the challenges that he experienced or he had to deal with as president, do you think the president has shown intention to deal with the cost of living, Mheshimiwa Basil?
Thank you first for inviting me to this discussion today. I don't know whether you can hear me very well from Nairobi. What I would say, the president, instead of lowering the cost of living, he has actually increased cost of living because he has brought new taxes. Many Kenyans are really struggling. You can imagine now the fuel at levy was increased from 80% to 16%. And the fuel being a key ingredient of economic growth. What has happened with the increment of fuel, most prices of commodities has gone up. Many Kenyans, particularly the low-kanda Kenyans, are struggling to exist. If you look at, for example, maize, 90 kilogram maize of 90 kilogram maize sack is retailing at 7,000 to 80,000 in most of the rural areas. If you talk of beans, 90 kilogram bag of beans is retailing at 15,000. Average salary of common Kenyan, if you take an example, a guard, is being paid around 15,000. So if you take cumulatively a house average of five family members, and particularly with the extended family members in our house, who are supposed to consume about 2 bags of maize and 1 bag of beans, then you tend to ask yourself, how do these families survive? If the breadwinner is earning about 15,000 and the cost of 2 bags of maize is about 15 and 1 bag of beans is 15,000, that's about 30,000. So this is to tell you, instead of lowering cost of living, the president has actually increased cost of living. And very many Kenyans are really struggling. If you talk of Mama Mboga, who was supposed to benefit from lowered cost of living, now Mama Mboga has to dip more in her pocket to be able to get services close to where she is. If you talk of transport, the price of transport has gone up. If Mama Mboga has to bring groceries to their kibanda, they have to pay more. So what I would say, the president, instead of trying to lower cost of living, he has increased the cost of living. And I want to tell my viewers and also, yes.
You're talking about the president, of course, increasing the cost of living through taxation. But for a country that is said to be in a hole, so much so that in terms of the debts it has accumulated, what do you propose the president should have done in a situation like that one?
One thing, borrowing is not a problem, because the debt ratio to the GDP in Kenya stands at 68%. The debt ratio to GDP in Japan stands at 200%. If you talk of the debt ratio to the GDP of United States, is about 100% plus. The issue we have in Kenya is how we utilize the money we borrow. We borrow money and most of the money goes to wastages. So we should have cut on wastages, at the same time manage issues of graft. If you control this or if you tame this, then you'll have savings that can go to development. You saw when the president was elected, he even created more positions for CAS, which is even unconstitutional. And this is adding more burden. And that's where I'm saying the problem is not borrowing. The problem is how do we spend the money we borrow.
Thank you very much. We'll be coming back to you, Mheshimiwa, in a bit. Bring it back to
Nairobi.
Nairobi.
That is where we have missed the point.
And I mean, that's the question that Mheshimiwa Basir poses. How do you convince Kenyans that you're dealing with the high cost of living when all we see are taxation measures, including what has been introduced today as proposals by the Minister for Treasury, Professor Njuguna Ndung'u, which obviously appears to be another raft of taxation on top of what is happening right now?
Well, let me say that JJ and my good friend from Yatta, who we share the last part of the name Manyata, is actually being very naive on this. Because number one, when it comes to the issue of debt, it is very hard to compare Kenya with Japan. When you say Kenya GDP is at 68% and Japan is past 100%, you are comparing two economies that are not even equal in terms of what they do in terms of export. The amount of revenue Japan receives from its export in terms of foreign exchange, it is not comparable in this country. Now, let me just single it down to the cost of living. And JJ, it is true that the cost of living has actually increased a little bit. And I'll tell you why. The previous administration was so focused to winning the previous election that they were subsidizing at the consumption side of this country. We were subsidizing fuel, we were subsidizing unga, we were subsidizing almost everything, putting taxpayers' money to the consumption side. And I am very happy, and I want to say that I have been following keenly, including reading the budget that we have read. This is the first budget that is going to be a Kenya Kwanza budget that is being implemented right now. We have put money to ensure farmers are able to produce food, enough food. And I'll tell you, budget for agriculture has gone up, and it is right now at 50 billion Kenya shillings. And out of that, 8.6 billion is going for subsidizing fertilizer. I can tell you, JJ, there is no other way of lowering the cost of living than us producing our own food, making sure that we produce enough, and actually luring everybody to come back to their land instead of going to the street and putting the sufurias on their head and go produce food.
All right.
Now,
very quickly,
the issue of actually the increment in taxes is something that also we have to face the reality of it. The fact of the matter is, we, number one, have a problem with what we are collecting as a country. So, what did the president think about? Number one is everybody to tighten his belt. Number two, everybody to actually come up and bring something on the table in terms of the taxes of this country, so that we can be able to collect enough and be able to do these things that we want to do that will conjure the growth. And this includes the issue of value addition. And I want to tell you something about this country. We have to start doing value addition. The president has put in money through KIPES, putting money through the agricultural value chain, putting money to even artisan, and we have had of issues even of hides and skins. All these things, we need them so that we can start doing some export, so that we can get some extra money from outside and be able to get at least in the level of Japan, as my good friend from Yata is dreaming.
We'll come back to that. Annette, there's something you're raising about the Hustler Fund, but of course, as you raise those questions, the big question is, for a man who promised to deliver on this fund, one targeting individuals and the other targeting groups, so far he has done that. Wouldn't you credit him for honoring that promise?
Absolutely, and that's why I mentioned when you talk about positives, that's happening. But again, we don't need to refrain from poking holes, because as civil society organizations, our mandate is to watchdog government, to basically look at the actions and also seek accountability. So we are basically doing our job, and if there is a gap that needs to be pointed out, least we failed. So having said that, I think back to the point of economy. One of the promises as well was to slash down on borrowing. Also ensure that there's prudent management of public resources, ensuring there's transparency, accountability, and public participation. And so on the 13th of September last year, when this current regime took power, the president committed to execute the constitution. And so part of the constitution is also just ensuring under Article 1, where sovereignty belongs to the people of Kenya and they've delegated it to this government, just ensuring that people's will is put into consideration. So when you talk about public debt in this case, just as of 30th of June this year, sorry, let me take us back. When the government came into being, our debt was at 8.7 trillion. And as at 30th of June this year, it's confirmed that 1.56 trillion has already been borrowed by this current regime. And that has then ballooned our debt to over the 10 trillion mark, which again
always goes beyond the parliamentary ceiling.
Exactly, and that's something that has never happened before, but we have surpassed that. So that means the promise has not been kept. At the same time, as we speak, our wage bill is about 69.3. What does that tell us? You know, and when we when we talk about repayment of debt, we are at 55%. Where is development money? So clearly, when you talk about the architect and the foundations, we are likely, as taxpayers, not going to realize services in tandem with what we are paying.
Let me ask you a quick one, because you paint the current situation, what you would say our fiscal health. Is it that why the president then is introducing taxation, so to bring things back to normalcy?
That is okay, and we have said taxation is good. But then the return should be in tandem with what we are giving as the hustlers or as Kenyans. So we cannot be paying taxes, as people continue to say, when it comes to matters housing levy. That's a gray area. What's the framework? Do we even need the houses? It's not clear how this is going to be executed.
All right.
So much is happening around taxation that clearly, when you look at where we are economically or where we are as regards public finance, the wage bill where it is, the public debt where it is, clearly the person who is going to suffer here is the ordinary Kenyan who pays taxes but is not going to be able to realize the benefits that come with the same.
And that raises a very important point, Mheshimiwa Haro, on the promise to cut down on borrowing, and there was yet another reckless borrowing. Stop reckless borrowing. Based on the figures that are here and the debt status for the country so far, is that a backtracking of the promise?
No, there isn't backtracking. You see, looking at where we've come from, definitely we were bound to go through quite a number of challenges. And we look at how has the president maneuvered the sea and managed whatever he has managed so far. You see, the first intervention that the Kenya Kwanza government did, as soon as we were sworn in as members of parliament and as soon as the president was sworn in and the house was open, was to cut down the costs of spending in government by 300 billion. That was the first intervention we had. As we speak now, the government has lowered the fiscal deficit from 1.1 trillion to 700 million. And savings have increased.
1.1 to 700 billion. You mean?
700 million.
Million.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and when talks to national savings, we are now saving, we were saving 1.3 billion per month. Now we are saving 6 billion per month. You see, there are a lot of positives which people are not talking about. But when we talk about the cost of living, for example, which is the area many people are actually concerned about, the biggest cost, the biggest contributor to the cost of living is the cost of food. 52% of the problems of cost of living we're facing in this country is related to the cost of food. And that is where the president has concentrated with the fertilizer program, cutting the cost of fertilizer from 7,000 shillings to 2,500 shillings. The Agriculture Finance Corporation used to get 2 billion budget. Now they are getting 20 billion budget so that farmers can get affordable credit. And we are now looking at, predicting bumper harvest, especially for maize in this country, because luckily the rains have also favored us. So I think the challenges will always be part of life, and those challenges will be zeroed in on by the opposition. But the fact is, this president and this government has laid in place a foundation that we can ride on smoothly to realize.
I'm wondering, would you tell somebody who's sleeping hungry that challenges will always be there?
Well, we will definitely struggle to convince that person about the challenges that the government is going through. But the reality is the government is doing something.
All right. Okay, let's head over to Mombasa. Reconnect with Mheshimiwa Basil. You talked about wastage, as a means of, reducing on what we are seeing in the country. I would probably want you to point us towards some of these areas, because wastage is a very commonly used word. But take us to the specific areas that you think there is wastage in government. Mheshimiwa Basil?
Well, I'll talk of foreign travels, and also if you look at the government, for example, if you invite a forum, you find a delegation of more, let's say, the people to speak would be 2 people, but a delegation of 30 people coming to a conference or a forum, and the only people needed there is maybe 1 person or 2 persons. Today there is technology. We have Zoom, we have Teams. That's why I'm able to connect from Mombasa to Nairobi. But you see government meetings, people traveling from point A to point B, spending millions of shillings instead of utilizing technologies to be able to save cost. My brother from Manyata, he said I should not compare the economy of Kenya and Japan. But I want now to draw back and make a reference to a neighboring country called Tanzania. When the late Magufuli was the president of Tanzania, he was able to lower cost of living in Tanzania revive the economy of Tanzania by cutting on wastages and graft. Tanzania was not even able to raise any tax by the time Magufuli was president. They did not even borrow more money, but they were able to engineer so many development compared to Kenya. Today we are overtaxing our people, but all this money, most of it is going to wastage. Look at the way the budget was planned. We have 3.6 trillion. 2.2 trillion of that budget is going to the executive. Then you ask yourself, how is money going to the executive 2 trillion being able to be replowed back? Because that's not a revolving fund. Most of it in the executive, it will go to wastages, to trips and all these things. And that's why I'm saying, if we want to revive this economy meaningfully, let's cast on wastages, let's try to tame graft, and Kenya will have a lot of savings to be able to engineer development projects without necessarily borrowing. And will also be able to repay debt in a gradual and in a meaningful way.
All right. Mheshimiwa Basil will also be coming to you a little bit later. Let me bring it back to studio for about a minute. Gitonga Mukonji, I want to give you a rebuttal. It's a fair platform.
Yes.
I want to give you a rebuttal before we hand over to Regina to give us 1, 2, 3 stories.
Well, I just want to say that we have to face the reality, and it is important. And I'm happy if the opposition is talking of 40% range in terms of performance, and of course they always push it down, then this president is doing very well. But at the same time, JJ, I want to tell you that the first year of a presidency or any leader, the first thing is to set up a government. Setting up a government, you have to give it maybe not less than 5 months for you to have a solid government. The other 2-3 months, you have to put a framework. And we have seen even issues to do with corruption coming up, where now President has said mambo ni matatu for those people who think can steal from this country. You have to put up a framework for you to define yourself as a leader and what kind of a presidency you want to run. Then whatever we are looking at right now and whatever the president has achieved, we are talking of not more than 4 months of performance. Simply because the other months involve setting up government, setting up structures, and ensuring that this government is able to work. I want to tell Kenyans that there is hope ahead. And this is the year that whatever framework has been set, which includes issue to do with ensuring that we borrow for production, issues to do with putting up money for fertilizer, putting up money for education, reforming education sector, putting up money on agriculture, value chain, all these things we are going to see them now coming to fruition in another 1 year. And I would tell my good friend from opposition, let them not bring maandamanos anymore, let them relax, let them come to these talk shows and give their side of view, but let the government work. In 1 year, we will see magic coming up from this guy.
He has offered himself to come to the set. I want us to head over to Regina, for a few stories that we come back here. But of course, there's the question of wastage. And I want to, Annette and Mheshimiwa Haro, to think about it. Huduma number, maisha number. If government is successive, what are we doing? Regina, over to you.
Well, that's a good question, and I'll be waiting to hear what our panel tonight has to say. Remember, we are also open to feedback on our social media platforms ranging from Facebook to Twitter. And the question is, what is your take in President William Ruto's style of governance in the 1 year, now that we're marking 1 year? And talking about governance is that President William Ruto's governance style has been described as hands-on owing to his personal involvement in government operations. In the last 12 months, the president has traversed the country to launch government projects and made surprise visits to government institutions, chaired cabinet meetings outside Nairobi, and yet kept in touch with the electorate during walking tours in the counties. The president also appears to have picked up a new fashion sense, often donning the famous countersuits. Well, our reporter Gavison Minor delves into Ruto's governance style that has kept both the government and the opposition in check.
President William Ruto's leadership style is one that has been viewed as sleeves up, boots on the ground, and hands on. Political pundit Arnold Maliba says his governance tactic has been viewed differently by different players depending on who you ask.
Over time, everybody has come up with their own way. There's even a leadership style that is called the sergeant leader, quite incisive and decisive. We've also seen him actually sometimes insisting on things almost to the precision of what a surgeon will do if he's getting into a body.
Whereas his critics have described it as one that borders on micromanagement, his allies of a different school of thought praising him as the president who gets things done.
PSS are concerned with their work because they know the president will ask something about it. CSS are well concerned on how they take programs or how they implement plans because they know that the president will actually reach out, and when he asks questions, he will not be asking for generalities, he will be very specific.
And he has not hesitated to take his critiques head-on on his management style.
Explain to me how you are going to advise me if you have less information than I do.
On 1st of August at State House, during the signing of performance contracts by cabinet secretaries, the president, an ardent timekeeper, would generate a public discourse as two cabinet secretaries and some principal secretaries were locked out of the meeting for arriving late.
I don't know whether it is because these performance contracts have been going on for 20 years that many people maybe mistakenly think that it is a ritual. And that is why people resort to the old incompetent excuses. I will be expecting a written explanation, and it should not include matters of traffic.
This incident and a previous call for timekeeping during the induction of CSS in Sagana State Lodge, perhaps prompting CS for Investments, Trade and Industry Moses Kuria to hop onto a boda during a cabinet meeting in Kakamega to avoid arriving late. Ruto has also been walking tours across the country and chaired at least 2 cabinet meetings outside Nairobi, in Kakamega and Nyeri.
Hiyo maneno ya kuuza shamba ya Nzoia tulisimamisha.
During the walking tours, he made several stopovers, resulting in his political nemesis talking. The president also made impromptu visits to government facilities, among them JKIA, to ensure operations were as expected. His wardrobe change is also one of interest to fashion enthusiasts, prompting speculation if it was his new signature fashion statement. He's also known to be a faithful worshipper who rarely misses Sunday service.
As President William Ruto marks 1 year in office, his governance style is one that will be of interest to political science students to examine just how his out-of-the-box tactics may alter the country's view on the presidency. Give us Maina, the scorecard, Nairobi.
President William Ruto has hosted more than 31 heads of state and government, traveled to 24 countries as he seeks to strengthen Kenya's diplomatic ties. This has seen Kenya reap mega bilateral deals and his diplomatic star shine, dimming his critics who perceived him as a greenhorn in diplomacy matters. In the 40 minutes long declaration of cessation by Kenya to recognize Sahrawi Republic, however, remains the biggest blot so far in his foreign policy implementation. John Jacob Kerry examines the president's strategy in the last 1 year to the end to invest as well as partner with Kenya.
Diplomacy is a very important facet for any administration in power. It is what determines its respect or otherwise among the community of nations. Now, there are about pillars in diplomacy: communication, negotiation, long-term relationships, and the value thereof. Now, this is President William Ruto. Let me walk you through the journey of diplomacy for President William Ruto 1 year on. President William Ruto's accession to the highest office in the land marked the start of his journey to accentuate the place of Nairobi in the community of nations.
Kenya will continue playing its role in international diplomacy at the bilateral and multilateral levels, appreciating that we are host to major international agencies, including the United Nations.
From his inaugural address at the United Nations General Assembly, his first major international and diplomatic engagement, it was clear that the president was a man on a mission.
Given the magnitude and variety of challenges the world continues to confront, a more fit-for-purpose United Nations is urgently needed, one that possesses the legitimacy and efficacy in dealing with threats to international peace and security.
The president has stood out as a champion of climate change mitigation, earning him the position of head of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change in the African Union. His passion for the environment was evident as he hosted the inaugural African Climate Summit in Nairobi, which attracted 19 heads of state and government, top environmentalists, scholars and development partners ahead of COP28 summit set for December in Dubai.
Going forward, we shall use every available opportunity in the busy multilateral calendar, from the G20 meeting, the United Nations General Assembly in a fortnight, the annual meetings of the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund soon thereafter, as well as the COP28 to further prosecute our agenda.
Mr. President, I would just say to you, your leadership is palpable. We feel it. And in what you have said today, there is such a clear path ahead.
The president has also not shied away from advancing the Pan-African agenda, advocating for engagement on the basis of mutual respect.
The budget of African Union, to a good extent, is funded by development partners. What does it say about our ability to make our own decisions? Traders from Djibouti selling to Kenya, or traders from Kenya selling to Djibouti, have to look for US dollars. How is US dollars part of the trade between Djibouti and Kenya?
He has also championed for the restructuring of African debts, review of multilateral lending models to Africa, and intertrade within the continent.
We need a financial transaction tax at a global level where even countries like Kenya pay. We do not want anything for free. You will pay more eventually because you have a bigger economy. We will pay commensurate to our economy. And we want those resources controlled not by IMF and World Bank. Because IMF and World Bank, you have the final say. We don't have no say. We want another organization of equals.
Additionally, more than 31 heads of state and government, key leaders of multilateral agencies and top diplomats from Washington and Beijing have visited State House. Notable high-profile personalities include Japan Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, and Spain Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. The president has also hosted U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, the Undersecretary of Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Brian Nelson, and U.S. Senator Chris Coons. China's Director of Central Committee for Foreign Affairs Wang Yi has also met the president, begging the question, is Kenya looking east or west?
Is Kenya's interest first? East or west, where is Kenya? That is our domestic policy, our foreign policy. Where Kenya is getting optimal returns for our association with whichever side of the divide. I also want to laud the president because he has not just been the president of Kenya, but he has also been the champion of the global south and especially Africa.
The policy is neither pro-east nor pro-west. It simply attempts to appear balanced and not to be beholden to any side.
Kenya has also inked deals that dropped visa requirements for some countries and opened trade opportunities as part of the economic recovery journey. The president has also advocated for regional peace in DRC and Sudan, as well as condemned coups witnessed in some francophone nations. The biggest blot to his diplomacy profile, however, remains that in which he cut ties with the Sahrawi Republic, despite the fact that President Brahim Ghali was in the country for his inauguration. The decision was later rescinded within the hour. President Ghali was among the heads of state who graced the red carpet during the Africa Climate Summit. John Jacob Curia, a government scorecard.
So which direction is Kenya facing? Well, answered there is that where Kenya can optimize, well, that's the direction that the government is willing to take. But then let's hear what the rest of the political divide has to say in regard to Ruto's style of governance, where Nyanza region has perceived a political base of opposition politics has been the stage of repeated forays and persuasions from the Kenya Kwanza government in the past 1 year. It has, however, been met with seemingly calculated resistance, one that now threatens the political future of 6 members of parliament. Chala Simon explains.
A year after Kenya Kwanza administration assumed the reins of power, one constant message that has emanated from the president and his executive has been that of service delivery to all, regardless of their political affiliation.
Mambo ya viongozi hawa wananchi waliamua tarehe 9 mwezi wa 8. Sasa kwa sababu ya viongozi ilishaamuliwa na tumepatiwa nafasi ya uongozi. Sasa na sisi kazi ambayo imebakia ni kuwafanyia hawa wananchi kazi.
However, the association by a number of opposition legislators with the president in the guise of looking for development has been met with resistance, especially from the opposition leaders who see the association as an unholy alliance that contravenes the constitution.
My father taught me a good lesson. He asked me not to follow the defined path that many people like to follow. He asked me to follow the rough path because that rough path takes you further.
At least 6 members of the bicameral assembly from the opposition are currently facing sanctions over the same.
Katiba inasema serikali kuu na serikali ya ugatuzi lazima zifanye kazi pamoja. Na lazima mimi kama gavana nifanye kazi niletee watu wangu maendeleo.
However, there are those of the opinion that the region will benefit greatly if it works closely with the government.
But there has been this small matter, Governor, that ensured that I didn't come. But Mungu ni nani? Watu wametulia, hakuna kuandamana, hakuna sufuria, na nimekuja. So I thank God for this peace that we are enjoying. And I want to speak to the people of Homa Bay. Peace is good. Peace is a precursor to development. So long as we remain quiet and peaceful, development will find its way. So I will keep coming in this environment.
Some argue resources allocated to the county government is a drop in the ocean when it comes to what remains at the national level and needs constant canvassing from elected leaders to have it cascaded to the county and regional levels.
The amount of money that comes to these regions by the counties is like a drop in the ocean compared to the resource outlay that we require to roll out the development agenda. A substantial proportion of revenue still remains with the national government. Yeah, these counties hardly even have resources. Most of the resources goes towards recurrent expenditure. As you are aware, the counties cannot even engage in public-private partnerships without getting sovereign guarantee from the national government. So tell me something. How are you going to develop this region if you are not working closely with the national government?
Locals are, however, divided on the levels at which engagement should be and if indeed the current engagement has seen any meaningful developments in the region.
You need to be supported, but this issue that some of them being done here, like in the name of launching ICT which we don't work, is a waste of public time. It's a waste of money. Because the cost you use to launch this thing, choppers, and what you put there doesn't make sense. So let's government empower people in the right way so that we can work towards the reduction of poverty and cost of living. Okay.
The government has invested billions of shillings that will see the region benefit from ring road around Lake Victoria to ease transportation of goods and services around the lake, started a fish research institute in Nyando and Siaya sub-county, as well as aggregated economic zones in Homa Bay, Siaya and Kisumu counties. Achola Simon, the government scorecard, Kisumu County.
Now, still on politics, the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya has had its fair share of run-ins with their ruling Kenya Kwanza counterpart in the political arena that led to disagreements, demonstrations, and even fueled intolerance in the country following the outcome of the 2022 general elections. This series of events has now led to two leading political factions to the table to settle their political differences and address the deep-rooted mistrust among them. Our reporter Abdiaziz Hashim traces the opposition's political footprint 365 days later.
To the people of Kenya, this is a momentous occasion for our country. Our politics and our elections have never failed to be emotive, engaging, and dramatic.
Since President William Ruto took over the reins of power and became the country's fifth head of state, the outcome of the 2022 general election proved to be a bitter pill to swallow for the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya led by Raila Amolo Odinga.
I repeat, the figures announced by Mr. Chebukati are null and void and must be quashed by a court of law.
This prompted the opposition chief to call for the audit of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission IBC service for months on end. However, that proved to be an uphill task for the opposition as the Apex Court ruled on the matter with finality.
The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Kenya Kwanza, something that we respected and we never agreed.
We did take our matters to court, especially on the issue of the presidential election results. And the court upheld the results to our dissatisfaction.
Before the 9th of August last year, we were working to form the government. And when we were not able to form the government as it were pronounced by the Supreme Court, we took on the role of the opposition.
The ODM leader, alongside his core principles, decided to go back to the electorate and devise their next course of action following the outcome at the corridors of justice.
You say you're going to assemble at the Central Park in the city of Nairobi and march to the IBC headquarters.
Numerously, the opposition wing held rallies at the historic Kamukunji grounds where they called on their supporters to turn up in large numbers to protest the rising cost of living that was proving to be a headache for many Kenyans.
Nataka gharama ya maisha fanye nini? Simuko tayari? Simuko tayari?
And when a section of the citizenry took to the streets, tear gas canisters, clobbers and arrests were the order of the day. Dozens were injured whilst others lost their lives in the process. The nationwide demos also saw hundreds arrested for destabilizing peace in the country. The three cycles of the demonstration forced the two ruling coalitions to come to the table through an appointed parliamentary bipartisan team led by Rarieda Member of Parliament Otiende Amolo of Azimio and Kenya Kwanza's Tharaka MP George Murugara.
That action made the ruling regime to agree to sit down with us to try and address the issues that bedevil the country.
We stopped Mandamano, and the team led by Otiende Amolo and the likes went into the talks.
So in terms of getting the people's agenda on the table, I would quickly say that we have been successful.
The talks lasted for a few months after both parties failed to reach an agreement. The event saw religious leaders, professional and human rights bodies urging both political factions to forego their grandstandings and engage in dialogue. The clarion call reverberated across the country and led to President William Ruto and ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga to meet under the guise of former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo.
To enter into a constitutional, open-ended and binding dialogue with this government to find a resolution to the issues that we in Azimio have raised about the last year's election and the key governance and the cost of living issues facing our country.
The meeting between the three birthed what is known now as the National Dialogue Committee that is expected to settle the political differences between the two factions.
And here we are at Bomas, trying to address those issues in a bipartisan manner.
Initially, you know that KK had said there are no talks, we are not going to have even cost of living on the table and all those kind of things. But the fact that we are now coming from a national dialogue.
The new bipartisan talks are led by Wiper Party leader Kalonzo Musyoka and National Assembly's Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah.
As far as Azimio la Umoja One Kenya is concerned, our teams have been ready.
We have also indicated that we are here to engage in good faith, in line with our laws and our constitution.
All eyes are now on the 10-member committee that is expected to end the political intolerance witnessed in the country for the last 365 days. It remains to be seen if the talks between Azimio and Kenya Kwanza will bear fruit or intensify their political rivalry, despite many Kenyans hoping that that will not be the case. Abdiaziz Hashim for the Government Scorecard.
And now the government scorecard right here on KBC Channel 1 Prime Edition takes a breather. When we're back, we're going to have more candid conversations. Do not go away.
Officially, Nudhi iko ndani ya one of the boxes ya Lucky Game. Cheza Lucky Game. Kumbuka ni *570#. Chagua Lucky Game. Kisha chagua one of the boxes kati ya hizo 7. Weka stakes zako usiwe chini ya 20 shillings na isizidi 2,000 Kenyan shillings. Zawadi ziko kem. Ikiwapo pia Nudhi tumeingiza mahali pale. Vur na *570#.
Vijana chapakazi wenye nguvu za ziada.
My youth, uko na talent ya kusing, spoken word, kucompose jingles ama any other unexploited artistic talent. Gava through Ministry of Information, Communication and the Digital Economy na KBC sasa wamekama up na project ya kupromote usanii called Studio Mashinani. Hizi ni studios ziko grassroots and they are fitted with high quality state-of-the-art equipment where you can produce quality audio and video music content for free. What's more, wanaoffer mentorship na talanta yako itakuwa promoted on KBC Channel 1 TV, Y254 na radio stations za KBC. Tembelea Studio Mashinani huko Comarox, Langata, Sauti House Mombasa, Kirwara huko Gatanga, Kitui next to Manyanyoni Chiefs Camp na Kisumu City wako hapo KBC Station. Usilalie talent. This is your chance to commercialize and popularize your talent through Studio Mashinani.
Huyo ni wangu mimi na namhitaji nyumbani ubavuni mwangu.
Naona hata haya masuala ya divorce yangekuwa finalized so that kila mmoja awe free afuate shughuli zake.
Nini ambao kinakusumbua jamani mwanzangu?
Unafikiria kila mtu yataka kunaona kama wewe?
How many times mimi nimesema huyu mwanamke simpendi na simtaki.
Me and Dingo have a son together. Na hivi karibuni atakuja kuishi hapa kwenye hii nyumba. Kate ulaniwe mpaka pale ambapo unalala.
Welcome back. You're watching the special edition of President Ruto at 1. I'm still with my guests in studio, and I want to hand it back to Annette. There's that question of wastage that, that point came from Mheshimiwa Basil, and I was asking about Huduma number and Maisha number. Probably from where you see, do you see it as a form of wastage?
Absolutely. That's, to me, a misplaced priority by the government, because when you look at the Maisha number and the Huduma number, to me it's one and the same. They all intend to serve a common purpose, where it's basically consolidating these documents into one to allow for efficiency as regards government services. And so there's this one that is coming up basically to just say it's strengthening the security and all that. So if that's the case, do we need an alternative, or we then need to deepen what we have? So for me, I think this is a case of individuals serving selfish interest, and to me, I think it's personal interest that is motivating this move by the government, particularly at this moment when we are struggling economically, and Kenyans would want to see the cost of living being lowered. We would want to see services at the county levels. We would want to see resources channeled towards development projects. Why do we need Huduma number? Why do we need the Maisha or the digital ID at this particular point in time? So for me, that's misplaced priority, particularly where we are financially as a country. It doesn't add up.
You see, the question is, a government is regarded as successive. So I would imagine that the data that the country got from Huduma number is still available and accessible. Why then do we need Maisha number? And as Annette says, in a country that is struggling, like you painted.
Thank you very much. Let me say, first of all, in the spirit of digitization of services to the citizens. Recently, the president launched about 5,000 services on the e-citizen platform, and we're looking at the trend where the world is moving, and the digital economy and what have you. You cannot have digitized services when the form of identification is still analog. And look at the Huduma number we're talking about. By the time it was stopped by the courts, it had gobbled 10 billion Kenya shillings. And by the time it would have, reached its conclusion, perhaps you would have gobbled another 10 billion. Now, the government is saying, we will not go through all that expensive process, covered in opaqueness and corruption and what have you. We will look at the information that's already in the government's databases and consolidate that information at a cost of only 1 billion Kenya shillings. So you can imagine what we are looking at is not a wastage, because that service is a requirement now at this stage in time of our life as Kenyans, because of the things I've already talked about. And we are going to do it at only 1 billion Kenya shillings. So it's not about a selfish agenda by an individual. It's a government determined to provide these services to its citizen in a very transparent manner. And then this, the new that generation ID, Maisha number, is actually an enhanced compared to what Huduma number was. Huduma number was not machine readable. This one, the government is proposing, is going to be machine readable. But let me finish by saying, when it comes to question of wastage, I think everybody, including those of us in Kenya Kwanza government, nobody wants to see, wastage. And the government is doing very hard, is working very hard to deal with this. The president has pronounced himself in no uncertain terms, when he was addressing his cabinet, when he was addressing other level of leaders, and what Mheshimiwa from Manyata said earlier, the president said, mambo sasa ni matatu.
On the mention of mambo ni matatu, as I head to Mheshimiwa Basil in Mombasa, we've seen the president talk about the mambo matatu, and of course that has attracted criticism from the opposition. But for a man who was perceived to be associated to corruption when he was taking over power, don't you think the tone, Mheshimiwa Basil, by the president is kind of reassuring to a country that is dealing with massive levels of corruption? Mheshimiwa.
Well, some of the remarks the president is making, we can only ascertain we can only say that if he's committed, he needs to move from talk to action, because there's a lot of talking, but there's very little action. And I would encourage him to act instead of talking, because if you talk of corruption, that is a story we have been singing since 1963. I mean, over the years, we have been talking of the same story. We need real action. We have seen scandals in stadiums that have stalled because of corruption. We have seen dams where money has been stolen and no much has been done. We have been seeing people who are supporting the government because their cases being dropped because they are supporting the government instead of being tried, and whatever money they have acquired illegally being repossessed and nationalized. But instead, what we have been seeing is a very skewed way of fighting graft, whereby only those in opposition or those not supporting the government are the one followed and their proceeds perhaps recovered. But when they toe the line, they salute and they say we are with the government, then they are left to walk scot-free. So we want to see a commitment from the top authority, which is impartial, not just on one side, because those who are not in government, they are the one being followed. And that is why I'm saying let's move from talk to action in an impartial way.
Okay. It's a very interesting point you raised there, talking from, moving from talking to action. But then you remember that the president has fired a PS on the spot because of involvement allegedly in corruption. But Mheshimiwa Gitonga, I think you've been able to hear some of these things that are being said, that some of President Ruto's government officials have become overnight millionaires. Does that point towards a corruption fight?
Let me say that, JJ, I'll tell you, the issue of corruption in this country has been seriously politicized. And it is unfortunate that is one of the biggest disease this country reels from on issues of corruption. We need to be realistic on this. And I want to say that, yes, we are talking of the president. The president has announced himself and has clearly said that he is not going to condone corruption. But it does not stop with him. We need to work closely with institutions that are supposed to curb corruption in this country and ensure that they do their job. And I'm happy to be sitting in one of the committee called the Committee of Implementation and Oversight Committee of the Constitution. And I want to say that institutions like EACC, institutions such as DCI, institutions that involve intelligence and knowing issue of asset recovery, these institutions right now, from the budget we have read, all of them have had an increase in their resources. That shows you that from the executive side, we have had a support from government that is supposed to actually trickle down, and we see results of ensuring that we don't allow corruption. And I want to say, we might demand too much, but even the constitution that we are having was very clear on the issues of dealing with corruption cases. And yes, I've had the cases of people are seen like they have become overnight millionaires. But we would like, one of the things that I would like to see happening is the issue of declaration of wealth. We need to empower that law, and Parliament is part of the institutions that will fail the fight against the corruption. And I'm happy to be part of this Parliament, because I know we just passed anti-money laundering bill that is going to have serious issues when you are caught stealing money. Even your relatives and your even your girlfriends and concubines will be finding themselves in problems if you take money from public coffers. So we might be talking of, he has spoken. The president need to lay the agenda straight. He has done his part. Then the institutions that have been put to actually deal with this problem of corruption should step in and be able to implement the issue of fighting corruption so hard that we would like to hear them say the president is defending anybody. I have not had a case where the president has called or said that this person should not be investigated. I remember him saying clearly that even if you're my closest friend, we will cut ranks totally if you find yourself in corruption. I mean, we have the clips and we can play them here, Bwana JJ.
In fact, one of the things that the president said, remember speaking to him in January, is that if you're caught up, if the EACC wants to arrest even his friend or the DCI, they should not bother asking him whether that person should be arrested. And of course, there's that matter of firing a PS. There's also, the story of the tone around the presidency on the war against corruption. Is that reassuring enough, Annette, from where you sit?
Not at all. We've been in 1 year of this government, and I think we have had a series of actions that do not point to the commitment to fight corruption. I'll just begin. The second month into office, we had the deputy president in Mombasa indicating that people or public or state officers who are in high ranking positions should be treated at least with dignity when it comes to arresting them. That's if they've been found culpable or perhaps have engaged in any corruption. So are we saying when it comes to corruption, people in public offices or state officers should be given a special treatment? To me, corruption is corruption and it should be called and treated so. And so that move and even language in itself does not inspire any hope to any Kenyan. Again, we continue to move and we see the firing of the PS, but at the same time you can already see the double speak. Then it came to Mandamano time, and even, before Mandamano time, we see the dropping of cases of high-profile individuals. Thereafter, they are appointed into cabinet positions. What does that mean? We are told that there was no sufficient evidence. In the first place, why did the case proceed? Do we want to say the DPP did not do his job or what?
Let me ask you, sorry to cut you short. I'm sorry to cut you short, because there's a question of these institutions that you talk about withdrawing the case are regarded as independent institutions. And I want you to focus on that bit, independent institutions. Then you have a situation where once the president has been told that this person has been cleared, and then you remember they have argued before that these cases were politically instigated. And I want to hear your response on this.
And it continues, as he says, I totally agree. It's really political. The timing itself, and why only politicians that are allied to Kenya Kwanza government, So for me, even as we speak, we will not really say that this is happening in the Kenya Kwanza government. I mean, it's a routine. It's what we continue to see happening. These independent institutions, from where I sit, they have then been captured, So we would say previously they were politically instigated during the Jubilee administration. The same has continued even in the Kenya Kwanza government. It's safe to say so. Because right now we are seeing the dropping of cases of only individuals that are allied to Kenya Kwanza government, and then they are thereafter elected into these cabinet positions. That is wrong again. It does not inspire any hope in Kenyans. And I think also looking at even the performance in itself, really, for me, from where I sit, this is basically rewarding cronies, because there are people in these positions, when you talk about positions that really should be held by people who have the technical capacities, that is
we'll talk about the composition of cabinet. I know where you're headed.
Please, can I interject a little bit, JJ?
And you're talking about the fusion of politicians and technocrats in the cabinet. We'll talk about it in a bit. But Mheshimiwa Haro, the Kenya Kwanza side cannot run away from the point that, Annette is raising. You have a situation where cases are withdrawn. In fact, before the case was withdrawn, some of these individuals were appointed to the cabinet, even before the cases were dropped, and then later they were dropped. And I think Annette is trying to say there appears to be a form of double speak when it comes to the war against corruption.
You see, first of all, every individual in this country, constitutionally and legally, I think, have a right to be presumed innocent until you're proven guilty. You cannot judge somebody before have gone through the processes.
What about if you have a
and they have whatever. So you see the question about politicization of this corruption, debate and corruption war is a reality in Kenya, and it's not something that started yesterday. It is a national problem that we have been dealing with since independence. The question of whether somebody has been, set free when, we are a country, again, respecting the rule of law. When the courts have pronounced themselves on a matter, the other recourse we have is to appeal if we can. If we don't appeal and then prove that what the court did was wrong, then I think this culture of, unless the ruling goes the way we want it, will always be against the courts. Is also, I think wrong. This government, particularly this president, is very determined in fighting corruption, despite all the names that he was called during the campaigns around corruption, and that he won't fight corruption and what have you. You see, in the few months he has been in office, we have seen what has happened at KEMSA. We have seen what has happened at NHIF. Just recently at Nyayo House, what he is doing to clean the sugar sector, and that bold, many people look at the Mambo ni Matatu from different lenses. But to me, that's a very clear, bold statement from the president to deal with this problem of corruption in a very unique way, and sending shivers down the spine of all those individuals who are thinking to become corrupt in one way or the other. The other issue about imputing motives on whether the president means it or whether the other person means it, those are just imputing motives.
Let's head to Mombasa, because you've talked about imputing. Mheshimiwa Basil, when the president says mambo ni matatu and gives out the options, there are those who argue it shows his seriousness in the war against graft. Why would the opposition oppose it?
Because they are corrupt.
Well, it's not just opposing it, but if you go to history or you make reference, when President was appointing his cabinet, that is the CS, we had some CS who had outstanding cases of graft, who today their cases were dropped and they were cleared and recruited to serve in positions of CS against the Constitution, and more so on Chapter 6 of the Constitution. So this is to tell you it's more of a hypothetical statement as opposed to practical and a committal statement. And that's why I said it needs to move from talk to action, because it's easier said than done. And some of the actions, like I've already indicated, show very clearly that it's just talking for the sake of talking, but we are here to see proper actions being taken, particularly to fight graft. Because if that was done properly, Kenya today would be in the path not only of being a middle income, but perhaps an advanced economy or upper middle income economy. But we are still grappling to move from poor nation to a middle income because of graft.
Okay. We had to move from middle income, from that level, obviously, to the higher level. Mheshimiwa Mukunji, of course, I saw you wanted to interject with Annette.
Yeah.
Very quickly in a minute.
I wanted to interject my good friend from Kenya National Human Rights Corporation, and I believe one of our duties is to ensure everybody's rights are respected. But when a case is dropped and somebody has not been charged, and she complains that those cases were supposed to move all the way, I believe it's an unfair look of things. But at the same time, JJ, I'll tell you, we really need to be keen when we are talking of corruption. And I believe institutions that are supposed to be dealing with this thing, the only thing we can do is ensure they have integrity, they are well supervised, and we ensure we give them the leverage of ensuring that they perform their duty. The only way we are going to ensure corruption is not a political tool that has been used previously by government. And I'll tell you, JJ, Many people are shaking at night, not being able to leave their places because somebody has told them, if you leave, we are going to implicate you on this case. And they do that. They follow our president today, and they find themselves in such problems. Those things happened, and nobody is denying that. And I'll tell you, there are so many cases of corruption, and I've told you I'm in the CIFC committee that peruses the files that are going on in terms of the cases in EACC. Many cases have no, they have no basis whatsoever. But you find serious cases, people who stole money, including, as clear in public, including issues like Telkom Kenya, whereby you find a whole company that is worth billions was sold for only 6 billion Kenya shillings. These are things that are in public domain and nobody was arrested. But we have to ensure the institutions are able to work and they are given the trust they deserve, and we are able to actually monitor them as the National Assembly, where we are supposed to
Before we go to Regina, in 1 minute, a rebuttal for you. Annette, very quickly.
I maintain my position. Corruption has been politicized in this country, and all we see and we continue to see. Previously, during the Jubilee administration, it's happening right now. And so in this current regime, including the independent institutions and individuals who made those kinds of decisions, really does not inspire hope in Kenyans. Because we cannot say that during the Jubilee administration, because there were individuals who were not aligned to the government, so they were implicated at that time. So today, they have been vindicated because they are aligned. To me, that is wrong, very wrong. And so all we need as Kenyans is to ensure, is to see these independent institutions, the EACCs, the judiciary, you know, being really independent, you know, and individuals holding those offices as well, ensuring that they meet the threshold under Chapter 6 of the Constitution, and also just ensuring that the executive as well does not interfere in the role of the judiciary, because what we continue to see in terms of even appointments to these institutions, this happens by the executive. So what ends up happening is that we see individuals only working for whoever got them there. As it goes, whoever he who pays the piper calls the tune. So that's what we continue to see.
We want to do a few more stories and come back as we wind up. But when we come back, Mheshimiwa, and that also will go to Mheshimiwa Basil, because I'm wondering, in a court of law, when a matter is presented before a court and it goes for 2-3 years, and then when the DPP says he wants to withdraw the matter, the judge just allows the withdrawal of the matter. Is there a charge probably on the DPP or anybody else on wasting the court's time? Because how does a matter drag in court for 3 years and then it is dropped? These are all the questions we will talk about, and of course talk about the fusion of a cabinet as we wind up. Regina?
Indeed, that's a very good question, and we invite your views, as our panel has divergent views in as far as how the Ruto-led administration has been handling matters of graft. What is your take? Our Twitter handle is at KBC Channel 1. Now, the Kenya Kwanza administration has received accolades on matter security in its first 1 year in office. According to Kenyans, the government has put in place tangible measures that have to some extent managed to reduce cases of insecurity, especially in the North Rift. However, the coastal region, more so Lamu County, has been a hard nut to crack, with cases of terror attacks becoming rampant. Here's Aden with the details.
I, William Samoei Ruto.
It is now a year since Kenya Kwanza administration took over the country's leadership mantle. Insecurity challenges in Baringo, Turkana, Mandera, West Pokot, Samburu, Lamu, Isiolo and Marsabit counties was the first acid test to the new administration.
Somewhere in a corner in this country, you rush, you get there in an helicopter, convene a quick meeting, talk to the people you have met in that meeting, and all of you fly out of that place. You will not solve the problem. It is very critical that before government makes any move, especially from the national level, there should be a lot of local interventions at the local level.
So my appeal to the government is that let us have local involvement, engage the local people, use the local intelligence, let us empower the local communities.
However, quick and ardent action by the government suppressed what was turning to be a threat to the internal security. The move received applause from a section of Kenyans. Various pockets of countries such as Lamu and Upper Eastern counties, however, continue to experience insecurity among the inter-clan clashes and terror attacks by Al-Shabaab militants.
But unfortunately, when North Rift is going down, the other areas are coming up in a very bad way, especially Lamu and parts of Garissa, which is really not it's not nice. You know, when we talk about insecurity in the country, it should be uniform. It should be all over the country.
Since the government came to power of William Ruto, the issues of extrajudicial killings have actually gone down drastically. And I want to thank the President and his team for achieving that.
Those irritants where the citizens themselves have a bigger role than the security organs, what we now need is to revisit the Nyumba Kumi initiative, citizen participation in security under the Nyumba Kumi initiative. That I would recommend.
Security crusaders pinpoint cattle rustling and banditry, terrorism and fight over limited resources as the main ingredients of insecurity in the country.
When you have insecurity because of banditry or land-related issues, it will actually disguise even the fight against Al-Shabaab and terrorism.
With a few months to the elimination of the electoral boundaries, is also a potential risk.
And gangs are applied to sort out centers of trouble in those areas of land. This gang is being employed to fight the other gang.
The Kenya Kwanza administration prioritized to heighten security by initiating various measures. The state declared a section of Lamu and other counties affected by banditry attacks as no-go zones and disturbed areas.
The guns have silenced. You remember the curfews they put? They were very effective. It's a very stubborn area.
I hope it is sustainable, and the best way to sustain security is to have inclusion of the local people living in those areas.
The government has also been eyed to strengthen the model of community policing known as Nyumba Kumi initiative.
Now from security to matters of graft, where the ghost of corruption is one that the government has labored to ensure it does not return to haunt the country. In the last 1 year, the Ruto administration has had to deal with two major scandals in the health sector and the sugar industry. The emergence of these scandals resulted in the sacking of a principal secretary and redeployment of another, while the sugar barons were put on notice in the now infamous Mambo ni Matatu. Timothy Kipnusu paints a picture of how the Kenya Kwanza government is working to ensure it tames profiteers of graft.
After taking oath of office with a promise to sweep clean incidents of graft, the president made changes to entities charged with fighting graft. First in the entry was an overhaul in the Office of Director of Criminal Investigation and the redeployment of the Director of Public Prosecution to take over the reins as the DCI. The president did not mince his words in warning government officials against engaging in graft or using their offices to settle political scores. Soon after, graft cases alleged to have been politically engineered were dropped, marking a new chapter in the government's war on graft.
It's not going to be business as usual, and we are not going to wait until public money is lost. The moment there is signs that you have intentions of doing something, we will deal with you firmly and summarily. And because we have enough people in Kenya who can do this.
A move that did not augur well with the government critics. His administration has, however, had to deal with pockets of graft, key among them in the Ministry of Health. The debacle in the procurement of mosquito net that resulted in the sacking of Health Principal Secretary Dr. Josephine Mburu and KEMSA CEO Board Chair Daniel Rono, redeployment of PS Engineer Peter Tum and the suspension of KEMSA CEO Terry Ramadhan. The sugar industry is also one that the president trailed his guns on, as the government moves to revive state-run sugar factories, believed to have been held at ransom by sugar barons.
Kampuni hizi zingine zote za sukari za kibinafsi zinafanya kazi. Wanalipa wakulima, wanalipa wafanyikazi wao. Mbona hii kampuni yetu hii hailipi wakulima na hailipi wafanyikazi? Kwa iko kizirani.
His sentiments ignited a war of words with opposition leaders.
Anakuambia wewe toka. Na wewe umezaliwa hapa Kenya hii, ni nchi yako wewe unajua.
However, the president remained unapologetic, maintaining the writing was on the wall, and those holding the country at ransom will not be spared.
Wameniandika, wamejaza maneno kwa magazeti, sijui Law Society wamesema nini, sijui watu Azimio wamesema nini. Wacha nirudie ndio wasikie vizuri. Nimesema wafisadi, wakora, wezi, wale wanaiba pesa ya wananchi, wameangusha kampuni ya Mumias, wameenda wakaangusha kampuni ya Nzoia, kwa sababu mambo hiyo yote inaharibika, alafu wanakuja hapa wanajifanya. Nimesema wafisadi wote, wakora wote, wezi wote wahame Kenya.
As he continued his onslaught on those engaging in graft, he directed Roads Cabinet Secretary Kipchumba Murkomen to ensure an officer in his ministry adversely mentioned for engaging in graft was off the government payroll.
There was one lady in one of the roads departments, corrupt to the core, to the extent that she could not be transferred by anybody, even by the minister, because if she was transferred, she will go to court, by the court process, and make sure that she's returned. That is the kind of chronic where corruption has taken us. I hope Mr. Kipchumba Murkomen and Bwana Mbogwa, I hope that lady no longer works for the government of Kenya.
Mambo ya Finland.
His remarks on the Finland education program scandal in Uasin Gishu County was perhaps his strongest signal yet on his zero tolerance on graft, cautioning counties against corrupt practices.
Kama kuna mtu alikula hiyo pesa, ajipange kulipa mapema ama ataingia mtabani. Si ndio? Hakuna maneno ya kubembelezana. Pesa ya ng'ombe ya mtu ama aliuza shamba, lazima arudishiwe pesa yake.
The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, EACC, has maintained it will not stumble in holding persons keen on looting from the public coffers accountable.
Our nation is being brought down by a few individuals who have positioned themselves to steal from us and to steal in a big way.
We encourage and enforce robust whistleblower protection laws. Journalists often rely on information from whistleblowers, and protecting these sources is essential to ensure a free flow of information on corruption.
Even as the government continues to put measures in place to slay the dragon of corruption, it is evident that the war against this vice will only be won if entities charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption speak in one voice in dealing decisively and squarely on those stealing public coffers. Timothy Kiploso for Government Scorecard, Nairobi.
To matters environment, Kenya's hosting of the inaugural Africa Climate Summit is a key achievement for the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in the past 1 year in office. The Nairobi Declaration, adopted on the 6th of September this year, underscores Kenya's and Africa's resolute stand in confronting the daunting challenges of climate change. As Kenya Kwanza marks 365 days in office, we look back at the year that was and the milestones achieved in the environment sector.
I, Soipan Tuya, being appointed a Cabinet Secretary of Kenya.
27th October 2022 at State House, Soipan Tuya took oath of office to take charge of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Top on the priority list for the docket was the implementation of the government's 15 billion tree planting strategy by the year 2032.
30 trees per year surely is not too much to ask. Even if we can plant 30 trees per week or per month, we can actually attain these 15 billion trees sooner than we have projected.
This ambitious project, launched on 21st December last year, seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, stop reverse deforestation and restore 5.1 million hectares of deforested and degraded landscapes through the African Restoration Initiative. Thereafter followed the lifting of the 6-year ban on logging, which elicited a mixture of emotions and reactions, with those pro-lifting the ban saying it will create jobs and boost the economy. The ones opposed to it expressed their fears that it risks reversing gains made in the recent years to improve Kenya's tree cover and boost water resources.
tukisema ya kwamba tutaendelea na kuharvest products ya misitu, haimaanishi ya kwamba ati misitu itakuwa inakatwa kiholela. Hiyo haiwezi kufanyika. So kama kuna mtu alikuwa anafikiri sasa iko license ya kwenda kukata miti left, right and center, utakutana na sisi.
Wakate miti, waharibu mazingira, na ukiharibu miti, ukikata miti, ukumbuke pia ile tunaita ecosystem inaharibika.
The Environment and Land Court, however, issued orders stopping the implementation of the policy directive by the President on 2nd of August 2023. On the 4th of July this year, a new update from the World Meteorological Organization warned of a 90% probability of the El Nino phenomenon continuing during the second half of 2023. In Kenya, counties prone to flooding, including Nairobi, are already putting in place measures to cushion residents.
When it gets close to that very heavy rainfall, we'll move them either to churches, we'll move them to our halls, our social halls, and we'll have to feed them when they're there.
We'll be prepared as well in the event that we will need to be in a position to vacate people, those who are in the low-lying areas.
The highlight of the year came between the 4th and 6th of September this year, when Kenya hosted the first ever Africa Climate Summit. This event brought together over 15 heads of state to the country's capital city, with one goal in mind: to steer the continent forward in discussions of climate change mitigations.
We demand a fair playing ground for our countries to access the investment needed to unlock the potential and translate it into opportunities.
We look forward to your support towards an ambitious agenda to change the perception on the place of Africa in the global efforts to combat the climate change crisis.
The three-day summit concluded with the adoption of the Nairobi Declaration that stood as a solemn and binding commitment that underscores Africa's stance in confronting the challenges of climate change. Key among the commitments by Kenya was achieving net zero emissions by 2050, the launch of the financing and locally led climate action program, the establishment of a new green hydrogen strategy, and roadmaps signal Kenya's intent to support the hydrogen sector's growth, and the announcement of a new National Climate Change Action Plan 2023-2027, as well as the Kenya Climate Change Act Amendment 2023. Yusufar reporting for the Government's Scorecard.
All right, we are going to be taking the final comments from our guests tonight. We've had quite a conversation around what the president has been able to deliver. Before we go to Mombasa, Mheshimiwa Haro, a quick comment on the aspect of, how the judiciary has handled corruption. Of course, that is in reference to what Annette was talking about, allies of a president having their cases being dropped. And of course, as you also give us your 1 year scorecard as Member of Parliament for Mandera South, very quickly.
Thank you very much. I think one, especially on the cases that have been dropped and the length those cases have taken before they were dropped, I think perhaps we should have a service charter for the DPP to say maybe corruption cases need to be concluded between this time and this time, so that we don't have this problem of cases, staying for 6-7 months and then they get dropped. But one big problem that I think is happening now is the question around lacuna in law. You see, we established an independent commission called the SEC to deal with corruption cases, but the power to prosecute lies with the DPP. And if the powers were given to the ESEC, perhaps you would have seen more speedier dealing with those cases. The other day, ESEC was saying most of those cases that were dropped didn't even emanate from them. It came from the DCI. You see that confusion, DCI, DPP and ESEC is what is causing all of this problem. I think there's homework there for us, especially for those who are legislators. Now straight to my scorecard. I think I was elected 1 year ago. You see, if you look at the Article 95 of the Constitution of Kenya, defines what is the role of Parliament and what is, by extension, what is the mandate of the Member of Parliament, which is basically one, legislation, oversight and representation. I think if you look at those three areas, I have performed much beyond, because I have bills that I've presented to Parliament, very crucial bills. Some of them are still on the floor of the House. I have introduced several motions to the floor of the House. which is one of the mandates. I've asked several questions to the CSS who have appeared in Parliament, and coupled with my contribution in the Committee of Parliament on the question of oversight, I think I've performed very well, and the Hansard records in Parliament bears me witness. But going to the ground, you see, I come from a region which suffers drought most of the time, and from the time we were elected, we faced a major drought in that region. And through my, I was in the NGO world before I joined Parliament. Through my connections in the NGO world, I think for the last 1 year, through my connections and talking to friends and what have you, we were able to secure help to our people in terms of relief, water and sanitation issues to the tune of about 200 million, which is huge compared to. Then one major problem I have in my constituency is the question of electricity, and I have also tried my best to deal with a 15-year-old problem in that constituency, and I'm happy to say, as we speak, the question of electricity is a problem that is almost solved in my constituency right now. And because I'm also a member of the Education Committee, I have, through the work of that committee and through the efforts that I've put in, we have really championed for the rights of teachers, right from recruitment, promotions, and their welfare.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Mheshimiwa Basil, you have your 1 minute to elaborate your scorecard. 1 year scorecard, Mheshimiwa Basil. Can you hear me?
Patia mheshimiwa yata.
Go ahead.
You can't hear.
Huyo asikiki rusha manyata.
All right. I understand you have a technical hitch from your end. Just hold it there. Mheshimiwa Gitonga Mukunji.
Yes.
As you're winding up.
Let me first say thank you to the people of Manyata constituency for giving me an opportunity to be a member of parliament at a very young age. And JJ, the Mzalendo ranking that came up a few weeks ago, I was ranked the most active young member of parliament in the National Assembly. That tells you that I don't go there to sleep. I go there to really speak for them. Previously, I've also came up with a very interesting petition of the WorldCoin petition that has now gone full-blown into a full investigation about the activities in this country. That is a motion that I came up with, and I'm very proud of that. Actually, it came as a celebration of my 1 year of being in a member of parliament. Aside from that, I think one of the key things for a member of parliament is ensuring that their people get their rightful share in terms of government, and I would say that we have been able to lobby a lot from the national government, and among them we have brought in my own the committee. I supervise the housing committee in the National Assembly, the housing department, and we have been able to bring in close to 4 markets in Manyata constituency that are going to spur a lot of trade amongst our people. That is the Embu market that is being done afresh. Number 2, we have Ambuvori market. We have another one in Carolina. And we are also redoing a SCP market that was previously left behind. And that is something I'm very proud of. We have been able to do a lot on electricity. And I want to tell the people of Manyata that in another 5 years, we might not have anybody without electricity in Manyata. Because right now, all the programs that we have put in place, the government has come in and is able to substitute and do even better. We are also doing very well on roads, and I was very lucky to host Madaraka Day. It brought in some really good teething, and we have been able to ensure the roads around town and the biggest roads around Manyata are now under construction and they are live. The only road that we are pushing and ensuring that we get money for it is one of the biggest road that is bringing a lot of agricultural goods towards town. That is Ena Kidemu Road.
Okay.
And those are things that we are going to do.
All right.
Moving forward, we have bills that we are bringing in the floor of the House. We are bringing a bill on macadamia. We are bringing a bill on local consumption, local produce consumption by government. And we are going to ensure that the people that we represent are happy with our representation.
All right. Of course, you don't represent a constituency, so we'll give you a closing remark before we go to Mheshimiwa Basil to complete.
Yes, to speak on behalf of Kenyans.
Yes.
It's Kenyans that
Yes.
represent here. So, August to the honorables here and also to the executive. And so it's the expectation of Kenyans that this government adheres to Article 10 of the Constitution on national values and principles of governance, including public participation, non-discrimination, human rights, among others. And we have also the Bill of Rights, and under the Bill of Rights we have Article 26 of the Constitution that provides for right to life. We have Article 34 on the freedom of media, 38 on 37 on the issues of picketing and demonstrations. And so about the political rights under Article 38 of the Constitution. However, in this 1 year of the Kenya Kwanza government, what we have seen is the resurgence of authoritarian governance, you know, a government that does not respect the rule of law, and also a government that continues to violate the Constitution. And a good example could be in the Public Finance Act. Kenyans spoke loudly, you know, they came out in numbers. Even children understand that we have a Finance Act in this country for the first time. So people overwhelmingly raised their voice to reject the finance bill. But unfortunately, it passed. We are not saying everything within the Finance Act is wrong, but many of those concerns were really not put into consideration. What does that tell us? Is that our voices are not represented, and particularly I would say authoritatively that parliamentarians failed us. They actually advanced their own interest. Exactly, they advanced their own interest. We also saw, political parties, again, the muzzling of the same, and everybody trying to run back to UDA or Kenya Kwanza because of selfish interest. Again, where is democracy at this particular point in time? Protest, we have seen over 75 lives being lost, you know, and seeing the president come out to boldly allowed police for having done
those
a good
lives
job.
Included police officers.
Exactly, but you see, this is the case of one life lost is one too many, because these are people who
including
are dependent on, you know.
life.
Yes, absolutely, a life should not be lost. The media as well, attacks on the same. So much is happening, and I think all we are saying is that the government needs to adhere to the Constitution.
Okay. The government needs to adhere to the Constitution. Mheshimiwa Basil, you're scored in 1 minute before we wind up. Very quickly, Mheshimiwa.
Thank you, and sorry for losing me. Just like my brother said, the Muzalendo polls that was just done recently ratified me as among the most active young parliamentarians in Parliament. This to tell you my contribution here on the floor is pronounced. It's not just a silent contribution. Some of the things I've advocated for was remuneration of village managers, as well as registration of senior citizens. And these have borne fruits, because as we speak today, village managers, the government has agreed to remunerate them on every month, to be in the payroll, as just the way the chiefs and assistant chiefs get payments. The same applies to the senior citizens who have been left out without getting their monthly pay or the monthly stipend since 2016. Now registration has started. This is after I petitioned the Minister for Social Protection to undertake the exercise. This was done in Parliament when through my questions, the CS for Public Social Protection was invited in Parliament. Additionally, there are quite a number. Through my lobby to development partners, I've been able to secure grants for women groups in my constituency. More than 23 women groups are getting grants to be able to start economic empowerment programs. There are also other representation activities through ministries. So I would say, in summary, my scorecard has been more than 70% in terms of performance, and more is underway because I'll do my best to make sure that I transform my constituency.
Basil, 70% for himself.
Man is 90.
The truth meter
Man is 90.
in Yatta. And obviously, we wait to see. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for joining us tonight. It's been a candid conversation. But of course, it's just the first year. And we hope we can engage more and, get to assess how this government is performing. Thank you very much. Of course, I hand you back to Regina Manyara for business and sports from this other end. We are done. God bless.